Once upon a time in a bustling city called Goldhaven, there lived a man named Reverend James. He wasn't just any reverend. He had been leading his congregation for over 25 years and was renowned throughout the city for one thing: his unwavering commitment to prayer. People whispered that Reverend James possessed an insight that allowed him to see beyond the ordinary. He wasn't boisterous or loud during his sermons, but when his gaze met yours, it felt as though he knew your deepest secrets. On a bright Saturday morning, Reverend James stood in his office, looking out through the glass window that overlooked the grand church hall. The chairs were perfectly arranged, the aisles adorned with flowers, and the choir softly warming up their voices in a corner. Outside the gates, a crowd had already begun to gather. This wasn't just any wedding. Today marked the union of Daniel Adebayo, the only son of Mr. and Mrs. Adebayo, and Chloe, a woman who appeared to have stepped right out of a fashion magazine. The entire city had eagerly awaited this day. As the choir hummed a gentle tune, Reverend James adjusted his white robe, picked up the Bible from his desk, and slowly made his way toward the altar. But just before he stepped onto it, he paused, turning to look through the glass once more. A heavy feeling settled in his chest, like a small stone pressing down. He stopped. Brother Ben, the church's head of security, walked past him and noticed. "Father, are you all right?" he inquired. Yes, Reverend James replied quickly. "I'm fine. Just lost in thought." He wasn't lying, his thoughts were consumed by the bride. Reverend James had met Chloe before the wedding. Their first encounter was during the premarital counseling. She had been polite, gentle, and remarkably soft-spoken. Yet, her presence left an eerie silence in the room, lingering even after she had departed. Daniel had done most of the talking, filled with excitement, pride, and an undeniable love. Chloe had simply offered smiles and nods. The second meeting was at the wedding rehearsal. Again, she seemed flawless. But when she held Daniel's hand during the practice vows, the Reverend noticed her grip was unusually tight, not from nervousness, but with a cold intensity, as if clinging not to love, but to control. Still, he had said nothing. Not everything required words. However, today, as he watched the bridal car arrive and the cheers erupt outside, the small weight in his chest grew heavier. Inside the church, the choir's singing grew louder, cameras flashed, and the organist began playing the bridal march. Guests turned towards the back of the church, their eyes wide with admiration. Then the doors opened, and there she was, Chloe. She wore a white gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was styled high, adorned with sparkling silver clips that caught the light. Her makeup was impeccable, neither too much nor too little. Her lips were a vibrant red, her eyes sharp, and her smile was fixed, like glass, beautiful, yet unbreakable. As she took her first step into the church, Reverend James's heart skipped a beat. Not because of her beauty, but because the very air shifted. The temperature seemed to drop slightly. The choir's voices trembled for a moment, and suddenly, the heavy feeling in his chest intensified. He took a deep breath. Daniel stood at the altar, beaming, his eyes never leaving Chloe. His friends stood beside him, grinning like schoolboys. The bridesmaids slowly followed Chloe, holding her long veil. People pulled out their phones, some already shedding tears. But Reverend James wasn't observing the guests. He wasn't even looking at Daniel. His gaze was fixed on Chloe's mouth. She was no longer smiling. Her lips were moving slowly, silently. She wasn't singing along, nor was she praying. Her lips were whispering something he couldn't hear. "Lord," Reverend James murmured under his breath. He blinked and looked again. Her lips were still moving, but her face was devoid of expression, no joy whatsoever. And then, for just a second, her eyes lifted and met his. His breath caught in his throat. Time seemed to stop. Her eyes didn't blink, they just stared. And in that split second, he heard something, a whisper, clear, calm, and heavy, if you bless this union, blood will be on your hands." He recoiled slightly, clutching his Bible tighter. Was it his imagination? Was it fear? Was it the Holy Spirit? He didn't know, but he couldn't ignore it. The bride continued her slow walk, now just a few steps from the altar. The whisper in his heart didn't fade, it pressed deeper, louder. The air felt thick. He leaned slightly toward Brother Ben and whispered, "Please call Mrs. Adebayo from the front row." Brother Ben nodded quietly and quickly departed. Reverend James managed a smile, masking his concern, and took a step forward as Chloe arrived at the altar. She stood beside Daniel, both now facing him. The music ceased. The church fell silent. He opened his Bible, but his eyes didn't drop, they remained on Chloe. "Shall we begin?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Daniel exclaimed, beaming. "Yes, Reverend," Chloe replied with a small smile. Her voice was sweet, her face calm. But Reverend James could see it clearly now, her hands were shaking, almost imperceptibly, but shaking nonetheless. He opened his mouth to begin the welcome prayer, but no words came out. Instead, he closed the Bible. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need to speak with the bride and groom alone. Just for a moment." Gasps filled the church. Daniel looked confused. "Sir." "Just a moment," Reverend James repeated, his voice calm but firm. Whispers rippled through the pews. People murmured. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. "Reverend, is something wrong?" she asked. He smiled. "Just a short word in private." "Right now?" she pressed. "Yes, right now." Daniel looked at Chloe, then at the crowd, then back at the Reverend. "It's okay," Reverend James assured him. "Please trust me." After a long pause, Daniel nodded. "Okay." Chloe hesitated, then finally nodded too, as they stepped off the altar and walked toward the small room behind the pulpit. The entire church buzzed with confusion. Some people stood to peek, others pulled out their phones. Ushers quickly tried to calm everyone. In the small counseling room, Reverend James shut the door behind them. He didn't sit, nor did he open his Bible. He simply stood and faced them. "My children," he began, "before we continue with this wedding, I want to ask you a very important question. Please answer me truthfully." Daniel nodded. "Of course, Reverend." Chloe's face was calm again. "Go ahead, sir." Reverend James turned to her. "My daughter, is there anything at all you feel you should confess? Anything you need to say before I join you together?" Chloe blinked. "I don't understand, sir." "I believe you do." She looked away, then back at him. "Sir, with all due respect, this is our wedding day. I'm not hiding anything." He stepped closer. "Then why are your hands shaking?" Chloe slowly dropped her hands to her sides. "I'm just nervous," she said. Reverend James nodded slowly. "All right," he said softly. Then he reached for his Bible and held it out to her. "Please place your right hand on the Bible." She hesitated for a second, then placed her hand on it. He placed his hand over hers and began to pray very softly. "Father, in the name of Jesus, if there is any darkness in this heart, let it be exposed. If there is any evil in this plan, let it scatter. If there is any secret hiding in her spirit, let it come to light. Amen." Chloe quickly pulled her hand away and stepped back. I don't think this is necessary," she said, her voice shaking slightly now. Daniel frowned. "Chloe, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, avoiding his eyes. "I just don't like this kind of drama. I'm not hiding anything." Reverend James turned to Daniel. "Son, do you truly know who you are marrying?" "What kind of question is that?" Daniel replied, surprised. "Yes, I do. I've spent months getting to know her. Have you met her family? Her parents are late, Daniel said. She stays with an aunt. Have you ever entered that house? Once or twice, Daniel said. Why? Reverend James didn't answer. He just sighed, then said quietly, please sit down. Both of you. There is more I need to ask, and we don't have much time. The small room behind the altar was now quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you feel something was about to happen. Reverend James stood near the door, his arms folded across his chest. His eyes never left Chloe, not even for a second. He could feel it. Something dark. Something hidden. And it was standing right in front of him, wearing a white wedding gown. Chloe sat down slowly, but her fingers kept tapping against the side of the chair. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel sat beside her and held her hand, trying to calm her. Babe, relax, he whispered. The Reverend is probably just worried about something small. Chloe forced a smile and nodded. I'm fine, she replied softly. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. Her chest felt tight, and her heart was beating too fast. Reverend James remained standing. He placed the Bible gently on the table and took one slow breath. Daniel, he said calmly, tell me something. When you first met Chloe, what was the very first thing that drew you to her? Daniel chuckled a little. Ah, Reverend, everything about her was special. I saw her at a charity event. She was helping this old woman carry water, and I just stood there watching. Something about her made me want to know her. She looked humble. Did you talk that same day? Yes, sir, Daniel nodded. We talked for hours. She told me about her background. She lost her parents when she was young. She's lived with her aunt ever since. She said she's always wanted to serve others, especially the poor. That's why she attends charity programs. I see, the Reverend said quietly, then turned to Chloe. My daughter, I asked you earlier if there was anything you needed to confess before we continued. You said no. Yes, sir, Chloe replied, her voice soft. But now I'll ask you again, Reverend James said, his tone firmer. Not as a man, not as your Reverend, but as someone God has placed here to protect this altar. Are you sure? There's nothing hiding in your heart. Chloe looked away, her jaw tightening. Daniel frowned and leaned forward. What's going on, Reverend? What are you really asking her? The Reverend sighed. I've been in this calling for many years. I've joined so many couples. But today, when your bride walked into this church, I felt something I've never felt before. A heavy, choking darkness entered with her. Chloe's eyes snapped back to him. That's not true, she said quickly. I'm not hiding anything. I love Daniel with all my heart. Then why were your lips moving when you were walking down the aisle? I was praying, she said. What words were you saying? Chloe hesitated. I was asking God for strength. Strength for what? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel stood up. Okay, this is getting too much, he said, looking upset. Reverend, I don't understand what you're doing. This is my wedding day. We've done all the counseling. We've waited months. You know me. You know my heart. Why are you suddenly treating Chloe like she's some kind of? Because I saw her lips move, Reverend James interrupted gently, and I heard a whisper that said, if you bless this union, blood will be on your hands. Daniel froze. What? What do you mean? Chloe laughed nervously. That's not possible. You must have imagined it. Maybe you're just tired or overwhelmed. The Reverend's voice became quiet. My daughter, if that whisper was just imagination, then explain the shaking in your hands. Explain the cold in the air. Explain why even now the spirit in this room is not at peace. Chloe's smile slowly disappeared. There was silence, long silence. Then a knock at the door. Brother Ben opened it slightly. "Sir," he whispered, "Mrs. Adebayo is waiting at the back, in a trance, like you asked. Should I bring her in?" Reverend James nodded. "Please." When Mrs. Adebayo entered, her face showed clear worry. "Reverend, what's going on?" she asked. "What is this delay?" The Reverend looked at her kindly. "Mama, I need you to speak freely. When you first met Chloe, what did you feel?" Mrs. Adebayo looked at Chloe and then at her son. She hesitated but then answered. "I tried to keep quiet because I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who spoils everything. But something about her always troubled me. She was too careful, too perfect. And every time I asked about her family, she changed the topic." "Mama," Daniel said, shocked, "you never told me this." "I didn't want to destroy your joy," she said gently. "But something in my spirit kept saying, look deeper." Chloe stood up slowly. "This is not fair," she said. Her voice was shaking now. "I came into this family with love. I did everything right. I respected Mama. I came for all the church counseling. Why are you treating me like this?" The Reverend stepped forward. "Then let me ask you again one last time. And this time, answer not with your mouth, but from your soul. Who sent you here?" Chloe's face went still, her eyes locked on his. Everyone went silent. Seconds passed. Then she whispered, I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel looked at her, confused and hurt. "Chloe, what is he saying? What is he trying to pull out of you?" "I don't know," she said loudly. "I've done nothing wrong." But her voice cracked, her hands trembled more. And finally, her legs gave out. She dropped to the floor, her head in her hands. "I didn't want it to go this far," she said, her voice low and shaking. "I was just supposed to get close. That's all." The room went completely still. Daniel stepped back. "Get close to do what?" "I didn't plan to love you," she said, tears running down her face. "It wasn't supposed to feel real. I didn't plan to care, but I started falling, and I couldn't stop." "Start falling into what?" Daniel asked, his voice rising. "What are you talking about?" Chloe looked up at him, broken. "You were the next target." Reverend James slowly sat down for the first time. His hands were steady now. The heaviness had lifted. Mrs. Adebayo gasped. "Target?" Chloe nodded. "They find rich men, lonely ones, ones who want love. The women are trained, taught how to behave, how to be everything a man wants. And once the wedding happens, the rest is easy." "What do you mean for the rest?" Daniel asked. She looked away, ashamed. "The honeymoon, the drink, the body is found in the morning. The will is already signed. The widow inherits everything. The cult collects their share." Daniel felt like the ground was shaking. You were going to kill me." "No," she whispered. "Not anymore. I couldn't do it. I changed the plan. I wanted to run, but they said if I did, I'd die instead." The room was silent. Everyone was frozen. Then Reverend James spoke. "You were sent by who?" "I don't know their real names. They don't use names, only faces, only numbers. They wear black robes. They speak in strange tongues. I was recruited 3 years ago when I had nothing. They promised me power, money, protection." "Protection from what?" Mrs. Adebayo asked. "From hunger, from pain, from being nothing. They said I'd never be poor again." "And you believed them?" "Yes." Daniel shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "Was any of it real, Chloe? Even one moment?" She looked at him with sad eyes. The last 2 months were real. When you held me after my nightmares, when you sang to me, when you knelt down that day and said you would protect me for life, I wanted to believe it. I really did, but the shadows were too deep. I was already too far in. Reverend James stood up slowly. The wedding is over, he said. Chloe didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just sat there on the floor, her veil slipping off, her makeup ruined, her dream shattered. Brother Ben, the Reverend called gently. Get the church team quietly. Escort her to the back room. Call the police. Do not make a scene. Yes, sir. Daniel, the Reverend said gently, you are not a fool. You are a man who trusted. You loved with your heart. But heaven refused this wedding for a reason. You've been saved from something worse than heartbreak. Daniel didn't respond. He just sat down and covered his face. Mrs. Adebayo walked over and placed her hand on his shoulder. We thank God, she whispered. We thank God. Outside the church, the guests waited, confused. The choir had stopped singing. Ushers tried to keep people seated, but something had clearly gone wrong. Inside, Reverend James stepped out of the room, his robe brushing gently against the floor. He walked slowly back toward the altar. He picked up the microphone and looked at the crowd. My children, he said. I want to thank you all for being here today, but the wedding will no longer hold. Please, I ask you to pray for peace and for truth. God has done what only He can do. Thank you, and may God bless you. Gasps filled the room. People stood, some cried, some clapped, some whispered, but Reverend James dropped the mic, turned around, and walked out through the side door. The battle had been fought. The darkness had been stopped. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The church building stood silent, almost frozen in time. The wedding that was supposed to be the talk of the town had ended before it began. People were still outside in confusion, talking in whispers, taking pictures of the empty altar. Some refused to leave. Others kept asking questions no one could answer. Inside, Daniel sat in one of the back rooms, staring at the floor like it could give him answers. His suit was still perfect, his shoes still shining, but his heart had fallen apart. He had not said a word since Chloe was taken away. Even his mother, Mrs. Adebayo, had stopped talking. She sat beside him, holding his hand tightly as if she was trying to keep him from breaking. Reverend James stood by the door, watching them with tired eyes. He didn't want to say anything yet. He wanted to let the silence do its work. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. Sometimes people didn't need answers. They just needed time. But time was not on their side. A soft knock came at the door. It was Brother Ben, his face serious. He stepped in holding a small handbag. Sir, he said quietly, we found this in the bride's dressing room. Reverend James raised his eyebrow. Where exactly? Under the vanity table. Someone had pushed it far back, almost like they wanted it hidden. Is it hers? Yes, sir. One of the bridesmaids confirmed it. It's her backup bag. Daniel finally looked up. What's in it? He asked, his voice rough. Brother Ben stepped forward and placed the bag on the table. We haven't checked yet. I thought it was better for you to see it yourself. Reverend James nodded slowly and unzipped the bag. Inside, everything looked normal at first, makeup items, tissues, a small perfume bottle. But as he searched deeper, he pulled out something strange. It was a burner phone, small, black, the kind that didn't need an ID to register. Next to it was a folded brown envelope. Reverend James opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, property transfer papers signed and stamped. Everything in Daniel's name was now moved into Chloe's. Also inside was a letter, handwritten, neat. The ink was still fresh.